I'm Dede Wilson of FODMAP Everyday. I'm here with Lee Murato, a wonderful dietitian who has written so many amazing articles for us at FODMAP Everyday. And today we are going to discuss the overlap of IBS and anxiety. Many of you told us that this was the topic that you wanted to discuss. And so that's why we're bringing it to you today. For those of you who are just coming in, you will be able to add questions to the chat, which we will address at the end. And we are going to get started. I wanted to begin by touching on a quote from our article that Lee wrote, which hopefully you've all seen. And this is that a US-based study from 2023 looked over 1 million IBS patient hospitalizations from 4,000 hospitals over a 3-year period. So that's a really well done study with a broad outlook. And the findings were more than 38% of those that had anxiety and 27% who had depression. This was more than double the rate of anxiety and depression for those found for people with IBS. So it's prevalent, that's more than a third. And that's why we're here today. So I thought we would start if Lee, and welcome Lee. Thank you so much for doing this with us. And
Hi,
your
Dede and Robin.
expertise is greatly needed. So could you first define for us what anxiety is?
Yeah, so I'm just going to reference the American Psychological Association definition, but it's defined as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. So it's thought to be sort of a response to maybe like a broad or a vague threat rather than a specific external trigger, essentially.
And how does stress, I think lay people, we use the term anxiety, stress, depression, nervousness. Like sometimes we use all of these terms we think they mean the same thing or really similar thing. So can you just sort of take us through the differences between these things and why we're talking about IBS and anxiety in particular?
Yes, they definitely are used interchangeably. I think depending on who you talk to, you may get like a slightly different definition, but they are thought to be different. So, like I mentioned, anxiety is more of like a response to something that may happen. It's more future oriented and it can go over like a long period of time. And it's more vague or broad versus stress is a response to an actual external trigger. So something like a work deadline or being in the presence of something that's going to harm you, like there's a mountain lion on your hiking trail route, and that there is a real danger there. Versus anxiety is more something that may happen but may not necessarily happen.
I thought when you use those examples, it's like that anticipatory thing, the fact that anxiety is something that could happen in the future, that really helped me understand the difference between the two. And the example you gave of something like a mountain lion, that's like here, you have a stress response, which is very different than worrying about, like, how am I going to eat when I go to my sister's wedding 3 months from now and stewing in that anticipatory, anxious state.
Yeah, exactly. I think they still can occur together. Like even the example of a work deadline, like that is the real stressor and you may be stressed about that, but then you may also have anxious feelings of all the things that may go wrong or could, go badly in that episode. That may not necessarily happen. So I think they can still exist together, but there is a difference there for sure.
And so the gut-brain connection, I mean, this is the perfect segue, right, into talking about that. I think that, most of us who have been on the diet for a while or have a low FODMAP diet or have IBS have read about the gut-brain axis or maybe just heard about the gut-brain axis, aren't quite sure what that means. So if we could talk a little bit about that now, I think that would be great.
Yeah. So definitely, I think more people are learning about it and understanding it. There's still a lot we don't know, but the gut-brain axis is considered that like two-way or bidirectional communication between our gut, our gastrointestinal tract, and our brain. So it's thought to be in sort of constant communication through primarily like different neurotransmitters, the bacteria and the microbes that reside in our gut, and then communication between nerve endings. And the primary nerve that's sort of responsible for that connection is the vagus nerve. So quite
And
an
so
interesting.
if someone, so, I'm assuming that, most or all of the people here um, have IBS. Maybe they've experienced anxiousness or anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
and they're wondering, now we are starting to understand what the connection is, right? So our gut and
Mm-hmm.
brain have this actual connection, but what can we do about it, right? That's the big
Mm-hmm.
question. And how the low FODMAP diet might feed into it, or,
Mm-hmm.
just take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think even to just like sort of understanding why there's that overlap can help us to sort of address it. So we still don't know exactly like why there's such a strong link between anxiety and IBS, but one thought is it may be related to like changes in the microbiome that can occur with anxiety and stress. And then also the overlap of that dysbiosis that's quite commonly present in those with IBS. So we know that people with IBS tend to exhibit like a sort of a lower diversity in their gut microbiome and a bit more of a fragile gut microbiome. So it tends to have like lower diversity of species, and typically like a lower population of beneficial or healthy bacteria. And there's some thought that just that imbalance in the gut microbiome could contribute to maybe imbalances in neurotransmitters and the regulation of different like hormones and chemicals that play a role in our mood. It's
What
interesting.
one of the things that I've always thought was really interesting is reading about how the microbiome can be altered and changed pretty quickly. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very, it's not static, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
it's this ever evolving thing, and I think that's a really interesting point that within this anxiety discussion, but also in a general discussion of IBS, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm often talking about in our groups, which is that people who speak up in our groups often speak up because there's an issue, right? They're having a flare right now, or they don't understand why this pain, or all of a sudden they're
Mm-hmm.
having diarrhea. There's something that's happening. And
Mm-hmm.
my observation is that a lot of times people fear that, oh my God, what I'm experiencing now is always going to be this way. Like they think
Right.
they're stuck in this moment, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so one of the things I'm always trying to remind people is that your gut's not a static place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
your reaction to FODMAPs aren't static, and the FODMAP content in food is not static. And
Mm-hmm.
so, well, that can be crazy making, because then we feel like everything's a moving target. I I'd like to think about it as well, but it means there's possibility for change. There's possibility
Mm-hmm.
for improvement, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
when it comes to the microbiome, if if we're on the elimination phase of the low FODMAP diet, and hopefully everybody here understands that the low FODMAP diet is a three-phase diet. So the whole diet is three phases, right? So when people say you shouldn't be on the low FODMAP diet for very long, they're just talking about that first phase. They're just talking
Mm-hmm.
about the elimination phase. And so in the elimination phase, we have a very restricted diet. And so, the point is to restrict FODMAPs, right? So we can
Mm-hmm.
calm our system. And if we are reactive to FODMAPs, our system will be calmed.
Mm-hmm.
But dietitians, all of you have educated us to understand that the reason why the elimination phase is not for long term is because of that restriction. We're not as positively feeding our microbiome as we could be, because we
Mm-hmm.
want to eat broadly, right? We want to bring diversity of those of those bacteria into our microbiome, and that's going to be best addressed by a broad diet. And so my segue here, my connection to the topic today, is that we hear all the time from people who have started the low FODMAP diet. It's been really successful for them. They're
Mm-hmm.
going through elimination. They've eliminated all these triggers. They're not having their explosive diarrhea. They're not having their extreme constipation. They're not having their extreme visceral hypersensitivity, and they're like, you know what? I'm going to stay right here. I'm too afraid, and I hear that word all the time. I'm too afraid. I'm too anxious of starting any kind of reintroduction or challenge because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to trigger anything again. So, can you talk about that, like that intersection of anxiety and moving through the diet into the challenge phase, and why it's really important that people move through that?
Yeah, really good point. So when it comes to the low FODMAP diet, and as we mentioned, it's a 3-phase diet, what it's really meant to do is help you to, one, like help better control and manage the symptoms of IBS, and then also understand like specific tolerance levels for different carbohydrate intolerances, or those FODMAPs. What it doesn't really get to is, as I mentioned, at the heart of IBS is that sort of dysbiosis, or potentially lower resilience or imbalance in the gut microbiome. So I always tell my clients, I'm always talking about this, but if we really want to help to manage IBS and help even improve our tolerance to foods and really help find like more lasting relief or lasting freedom, is we also need to pay attention to the health of our gut microbiome. So that's where the issue lies of just following the low FODMAP diet. And I've seen many people who have been following it even for 5-10 years, the elimination phase, on such a restricted even amount of food. So they may be following low FODMAP, but it's really only like 10 foods that are low FODMAP, or that sort of like really small safe list, eating the same thing day to day. So for a while that can help to control symptoms, but we know that when your diet is, as you mentioned, there's restricted diversity, especially in what's called like microbiota accessible carbohydrates, or like the food that our gut bacteria feed on, is that we can continue to sort of lose the diversity of the different types of microbes and species in our gut microbiome over time. So we can actually make that dysbiosis worse by eating a restricted diet for too long, or extending it for too long. So going back to the low FODMAP, even how we do it. So when we're following that elimination phase, I'm sure you see this too, but a lot of people will even just follow like their own very restricted version of it. So even only eating like FODMAP free foods, they may not even go to the foods that actually have yellow or red servings, and only eat the green. So it's a very, very small, narrow list of foods. And then some things they will just continue to stay on that for too long. So even thinking about it from that approach, there's lots of diversity that we can add when we're following the elimination phase, like just trying to get as many different plant foods as you can within the low FODMAP realm. And then, of course, moving towards the reintroduction phase, where then we can strategically challenge back in the different FODMAP groups, assess what our tolerance levels are. It's good to note too, like there's a strategic way to do it. We don't just like kind of randomly, add a clove of garlic one day and then a piece of onion the next. So it's also why it's important to work with a dietitian. But then we can sort of assess like, what is my tolerance level to fructans? Maybe I can tolerate a yellow serving, assessing sort of that tolerance levels to sorbitol. Maybe then you need to stick within the green. So then we can move on to the third phase, which is the personalization phase, where there are some FODMAP groups that we can be more liberal with, and then maybe others that we need to be more mindful with, and essentially be able to further extend like the diversity of our diet and get back in more of those FODMAPs, which are essentially, most of them are prebiotics anyways, so they help to feed the gut microbiome and act as fuel source for the microbiome. So yeah, it's a lot to unpack there. I see the same trend in a lot of like new clients as well, just that anxiety to add more diversity of foods as well as to like challenge FODMAPs. But my overarching message here is that it actually in the long term will do you more harm than it will do good. So we need to really think about the microbiome when it comes to
I'm glad
IBS.
that you mentioned working with a dietitian, because I think this is a good moment just to talk about that.
Yeah.
Before I've been working full time on FODMAP every day for 8 years, going on, oh my goodness, it's going to be 9 years
Oh,
at
wow.
this point. I know. Happy birthday to us. So
Yay.
for those of you who don't know me and my story, so I have IBS. I had been living with IBS for 25 years. I had a real health crisis, discovered the diet, and it completely changed and saved my life. And I was a professional recipe developer, and I took a right-hand turn and started developing food for people like me who have IBS and who
Mhm.
are following the diet. And when I started all of this, I was not aware really of what a registered dietitian was. I envisioned a dietitian in a hospital helping people with, tube feeding or whatever. And of course, there are dietitians who specialize in that. But what it's really important for everyone here to understand is that while we always suggest that you get an accurate diagnosis, and it's really great to be able to get one from a doctor who specializes in the gut, like a gastroenterologist.
Mhm.
The gastroenterologist's job is not to hold your hand on a day-to-day basis and help you figure out, okay, so let's say whatever, you're a mom, you're the only one that has IBS. You have a certain budget. You've got 3 kids. One of them also has IBS with you. The others don't. You cook 3 times a week, but you like to eat out. Each of us has our own picture, right? And the GI is not going to sit down with you and talk to you about those needs that you have that are specific to your personal and home picture. And this is exactly what the registered dietitians do, in addition to helping you maintain or maybe attain for the first time a positive relationship with food. And for any of you who are wondering if it's worth working with a dietitian or whether you really need to work with a registered dietitian, I'm telling you that, we're talking about anxiety today. The dietitian is going to hold your hand and help figure out a tailored program that's going to work for you, which is going to be different than what I would get, you need, different than, your cousin who also has IBS would need. This is a highly, the IBS is highly individual. The approach to the low FODMAP diet is highly individual, and it's the dietitian that's going to help you do that, and it's going to go a long way to assuaging those anxious fears that you might have. So, I always say dietitians are the rock stars. If you're not working with a registered dietitian, we have a list. We can help you find one. Okay, so let's go back to the article for a moment, because this is all based on an article, folks. If you don't know already, Leah's written an article for us called Understanding the Overlap Between IBS and Anxiety. And so you can always use that article as a touchstone to the information we're talking about here today. And we will have this video recorded, and it will be accessible in several places, including within the article when all is said and done. So we talked about how anxiety can impact the microbiome. So let's talk about gut inflammation and dysbiosis. And I think this is a complicated topic for me, because a lot of times dietitians and doctors talk about IBS as not having any structural effect on
Mm-hmm.
on our digestive tract, but here we do have this inflammation aspect. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the inflammation piece is interesting. So essentially, we have seen in more recent research as well that those with IBS tend to have sort of this more like chronic low grade inflammation in the intestinal tract. And it typically is related to that dysbiosis, because we know when we have potentially less of beneficial species of bacteria, specifically like bifidobacterium, which help to maintain like a healthy lining of the intestinal tract, then we can get some sort of like weakening or degradation in the layer of the intestinal like epithelium, or that sort of like protective barrier. So the inflammation that's present in IBS, like it doesn't tend to show up sort of on standard testing. Like we often can't even see it in like a colonoscopy or scope, or in like standard blood work. But yeah, it's something that we're sort of learning a little bit more about. And again, we don't have like the best way to test for it. But essentially in our intestinal lining, there's sort of like a few protective mechanisms that we have to kind of prevent like what essentially things that are moving through our intestinal tract, like food and waste, to prevent them from getting into like the blood stream. So one of them is like our mucus layer, sort of plays a protective barrier. And then also between like the cells of our intestinal tract, we have these things called like cell junctions or tight junctions. So we see that when there's sort of like a decrease in certain types of beneficial species of bacteria, and then potentially like an increase in certain types of more pathogenic, there can actually be sort of weakening of the mucosal layer and sort of like openings between those tight junctions. And what this can lead to is even like byproducts of some of those like pathogenic bacteria, we call them sort of more inflammatory byproducts, or even different chemicals from the food that we eat can actually start to pass through that barrier and make its way into the bloodstream where it shouldn't necessarily be. So sometimes we can sort of even see like extraintestinal effects of inflammation, things like migraines, headaches, joint pain, things like skin issues, acne, eczema, that may flare up even when digestive symptoms flare up as well. So I know there's a lot of people that tend to see both, like, you know, may get the digestive issues, but also we'll see sort of other signs of inflammation in the body as well. So it's an interesting connection. We're learning more about it, but that's sort of how I would explain like the inflammation piece and how it relates to that dysbiosis.
So we're talking about how to, why anxiety exists, how they overlap with IBS, how to improve our gut. So maybe we can improve our mental state as well. You mentioned helpful bacteria. So let's talk about probiotics for a moment. So it comes up a lot. People they read about probiotics, they read about how wonderful they are, they want to take them, they come into the groups, they say, is this a good product? Or they say, what should I take? And I think it's really important to point out that if you're following the low FODMAP diet, the elimination phase and the challenge phase are diagnostic phases, right? We're moving through these two phases to help us individually learn our tolerances and intolerances to FODMAPs. And Monash researchers who developed the diet specifically tell us not to take probiotics during these phases because they can alter our digestion of FODMAPs. And that's exactly what you're trying to assess at that time. So if you take probiotics during these early phases, you're going to be skewing the data that you're trying to gather on yourself. And I think this is a perfect example of where a GI might say to you, well, why don't you try some probiotics? Because they're not a dietitian and they're not trained in the diet and they don't understand that actually we don't want you taking probiotics during the first two phases of the diet. But let's say you're post-challenge and now you're at this point where you're really trying to build as healthy a microbiome as possible. What is someone's best approach in terms of food and or supplements?
Yeah. So I think we also tend to always focus on like, what is it that we're eating that's causing the issue? But then also maybe not want to work on expanding our diet, but focus more on supplements. So I think we always want to know like, what can I take in terms of supplements to help me feel better rather than what can I add to my diet? So I will say to like the probiotic fact that, yeah, probiotic supplements, I would say they are very commonly, I guess, like talked about online. There's a lot of like influencers that promote them, even a lot of doctors who don't know like a lot about IBS may just kind of throw them out and tell you to take one. But say with probiotics, like it really has to be a very specific strain for the right person at the right time. So I myself, like working in GI health and working with IBS clients, like I actually don't tend to recommend them very often. I don't find they typically have like, the best use for a lot of my patients. That said, there are like specific strains that could potentially be used for IBSD, for constipation, but it really just depends. But my focus is really like, let's work on actually looking at your food, your diet, getting in more sources of those microbiota accessible carbs so that we can like feed your gut bacteria and the good ones like bifidobacterium with actual food rather than just relying on a supplement.
Right.
So.
And for those who are here today, it might surprise you that this is the same that we hear from the rest of our success team. In general, our registered dietitians are not promoting probiotics. They're looking for, and like you said, there's a lot of influencers out there. There's a lot, if, all of us here have gut issues. And so if you're on Facebook, you're getting slammed with ads every single day
They're very
for all
convincing.
kinds of home tests and supplements that are going to cure everything. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So right now, this is a great segue into. So you're saying we're going to look at the diet. We're going to look at the actual food to help build the best microbiome as possible, which is going to affect our mood and that sense of anxiety. So we're starting from sort of the ground up, but it is two-way, as we said. So just as you like to look at whole food, which is, a more holistic way to approach things as opposed to a supplement, let's talk about non-food triggers, right? Because there's so much, like you said, when people have a flare up, they immediately think, oh my God, what did I eat? They go to the food. Or when they're anxious, they're often anxious about the food. Like, my friends are going out for pizza. What am I going to do? And they don't realize that the emotions, the anxiety that you're bringing to that might even have a greater effect on you eating that pizza than eating the pizza. So, the non-food triggers like sleep, hormones, stress, the anxiety is huge. So could you talk a little bit about that, about all the non-food triggers, how that is part of anxiety and how it can really affect our digestion?
Yeah. So it's always good to highlight that there's a lot more to your gut health than just the food that you eat. So even I know it's still related to like food, but even like the timing of meals and thinking about spacing your meals and supporting stable blood sugars can be a really good place to look. So I actually worked in earlier on in my career as a dietitian. I worked in like an inpatient treatment clinic for clients coming off substances. So it was a substance recovery clinic. And in the nutrition lesson that we used to teach like new patients, we'd always talk about the importance of like blood sugar management. And if any of you have heard of like the hunger scale, thinking about where we are from fullness to hunger. So when it comes to like supporting stable blood sugars, that can play a role in terms of like your digestion, because we know that if potentially blood sugar levels drop like too low and then spike up, that can actually cause changes in insulin, which can cause changes in like motility and movement of our gut. But also when we get sort of blood sugar fluctuations, if blood sugar drops too low or we go really hungry for a long period of time, that also is a big trigger for like anxiety. So and then that anxiety can also trigger GI symptoms as well. And then it may also cause us to maybe eat things that are not as maybe supportive of like managing our IBS symptoms or supportive of our gut health. We may turn to maybe more quick convenience foods, maybe things that are lower in things that help support our gut microbiome. So even just like thinking about the how we're eating and trying to eat a little bit more regular space meals, not letting ourselves go too long between meals, and sort of supporting more stable blood sugars can be really supportive of both mood, but also digestion too.
I love that you mentioned that, the thing about, that if you're not prepared, you might end up reaching for something that really isn't the best food for you. I think that a lot of people, they get very anxious when they know they're going to be eating out. Um, when we're home, it's easier to control what we're consuming.
Yeah.
And when we go out into the world, whether it's for a big holiday event, or you're going to someone's house for a meal, or you're going out to a restaurant, or you're going out to, a cocktail party where there's going to be a huge buffet, or, whatever it is, it can be anxiety producing because you don't know whether there's going to be anything that you can eat. And if you get hungry, you might start reaching for the things that are not going to be beneficial for you. So I think planning is huge. Like I always try to have a snack in my handbag. I'm I have certain bars that work for me. We have a great article on how to choose energy bars. Different bars work for different people. Some people tolerate pea protein, some don't. Some tolerate oats, some don't. These aren't FODMAP issues, but they're IBS issues. But once you find something that works for you, having something always at hand so that you're not grabbing something from the buffet that might tip you over the FODMAP scale, or go to the vending machine. So planning, for me at least, is a good anxiety, can ease the anxiety. Planning, so that I know I'm never without. We've also been talking a lot recently. We're doing this great project with FODzyme, for
Mm-hmm.
those who don't know FODzyme. So it's a digestive blend that can help you digest certain FODMAPs. And um, they have little packets that are perfect. You can tuck one in your jeans, you can have one in your handbag, whatever. And so if you're faced with a restaurant meal or something like that where you're out and about, you could rely on a digestive enzyme to help you through in a pinch. But not something that you're going to necessarily use all the time. So talking about different ways to approach this. There is a section in the article on gut-directed hypnotherapy that I thought we should talk about. Nerva is another company that we work with and who we absolutely love. The first time, it was actually the first year, so it was 9 years ago when we started FODMAP Everyday, and our very first dietitian, Erica Ilton, who started working with us, brought gut-directed hypnotherapy to our attention, and neither Robin nor I had heard about this. And for those who have never, maybe when you hear the word hypnotherapy, you think it's, some tricky stage kind of thing. It isn't real. People are being, put under and, to bark like a dog. I mean, people have all kinds of ideas of what they think hypnotherapy is, but hypnosis is. But there is something called gut-directed hypnotherapy, which is clinically proven. And so this is an evidence-based approach to calming your symptoms, and it works fantastically for anxiousness. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, directed hypnotherapy. So sort of like, I'll be honest, I think I tried a couple versions of the Nerva, but I'd like to test out doing like the full trial myself to learn a bit more about it. But essentially, it involves like discussion and education on the digestive system while also being put into like a hypnotic state. Sorry, that's what I'm looking for, in order to help like regularize or normalize digestive functioning. So there are actual practitioners who are trained in gut-directed hypnotherapy, and you could work with one like one-on-one. Otherwise, a lot of like the readers, listeners will be familiar with Nerva, which is essentially like a 12-week, or their first program is like a 12-week program where you do daily sessions that are based around gut-directed hypnotherapy. So the idea is that it's sort of meant to like improve that connection between the gut and the brain, and without even like adjusting your diet or thinking about elimination diet, meant to help improve IBS symptoms like visceral hypersensitivity, urgency, pain, gas, etc. So it's quite interesting. Like we said, there is good support for it. I found that it works best, I think, for clients who have a history of disordered eating or eating disorders, where we don't want to further restrict their diet because it will cause more anxiety around food, which then could make their symptoms worse. And really sort of moving away from looking at food as the issue or the enemy, and really helping to support like that gut brain connection, and reducing that anxiety and that fear around eating times and food options and all that. So has been quite helpful for a few of my patients, for sure.
I did I did it, and I found it immensely helpful. And just to let all you know, I'm very type A. I'm not someone that could ever like sit and meditate. I was anxious about doing it because I didn't know how I was going to sit still for 15 or 20 minutes, but I got to tell you,
Yeah.
I loved it. It's basically a guided meditation. You're listening to every day is a different little program, and you're listening to this guided meditation, and there's imagery, and it's incredibly calming. And it is clinically proven to be as effective as the low FODMAP diet, which is amazing when you think about that. Now I'm gonna integrate one of the questions that came in because it's a perfect segue to what we were just talking about. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
this person asked, can you please comment on IBS and the current trend of intermittent fasting where people can become anxious about their food management and how that can impact the gut?
Hmm. Okay, I need to read that question over just to get a comment on the
It's at
fasting.
12:34. Can you please comment on IBS and current trending of intermittent fasting? Because the segue for me is, you mentioned
Okay.
most of us have heard about eating disorders, right? So
Mm-hmm.
most of us have heard about something, bulimia or anorexia, nervosa, that sort of thing, but not necessarily, they haven't necessarily heard the term disordered eating. And
Mm-hmm.
I know last year, the great majority of continuing education webinars that I attended touched on disordered eating. And for those of you who are wondering, I mean, this is and a disordered eating pattern can be any kind of pattern where you are fearful. So you're fearful of starting the challenge phase. You're fearful of going out to dinner. You're fearful of trying a bite of an apple for the first time after you haven't had it for a year. All those things might seem incidental to you, but they're actually a disordered eating pattern that can then become a greater disordered eating pattern. So intermittent fasting, so this person, I think what they're trying to get at, so in
Mm-hmm.
intermittent fasting, you're having structured time frames where it's like you're not supposed to eat and then you're supposed to eat. You're not supposed to eat and you're supposed to eat. So it's this highly structured approach to food, but how does that affect the gut? And also, can that feed into anxiety around food?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think so to explain the intermittent fasting, essentially it's sort of structured fasting periods or times when you go off of eating anything with calories. You may consume like some water or an herbal tea during that time. There's different types. People do like 24, 48-hour fasts once a week or once a month. But the most common is sort of that 16-8 intermittent fasting, where you will fast for 16 hours a day and then you will eat within an 8-hour window. So when it comes to IBS, like there are definitely a few issues with this approach. One of them being even just the impact on blood sugar levels. So a lot of people, maybe if they're delaying eating too long in the day, that can sort of cause like dips, crashes, and then spikes in blood sugar levels, which can actually make IBS and gut symptoms worse. But even for people who maybe have, need to eat enough calories to fuel their body during the day, it may be packing in quite a lot of volume of food within like a very short eating window. And we even know that like changes in portion sizes can trigger visceral hypersensitivity issues. So for a lot of people, this can be a concern. And then even just the impact of potentially like under eating or not consuming enough calories or enough nutrients because maybe you're restricting your eating window through a very short period during the day. That can also impact like the functioning of your gut if it's not getting enough of the nutrients that you need or slowing down your metabolism. That can lead to things like changes in motility and worsening of IBS symptoms. So as a whole, I have a lot of issues, I guess, with doing intermittent fasting, and I would not suggest it for IBS. And then I think too, when we get into maybe focusing on quite restrictive or maybe hard to sustain sort of like eating patterns, or even call it like trends, that can lead to sort of maybe more anxiety and even contribute to like that disordered eating approach long
Right.
term. So there's a lot to unpack there. I do want to say though, like my approach as a dietitian, I do believe in sort of that idea of like chrononutrition. We also have an article on that as well, like thinking about supporting your circadian rhythms because they play a role in your digestive rhythms, and even trying to eat within similar times during the day, eating more during the daytime, like having maybe a somewhat of a fasting window. A lot of people do like 12-hour fast, but that's a little bit like, or I would say for most people, much easier to sustain, and we know it can help, versus the intermittent fasting, I think for most people with IBS will cause more issues than good.
We have the article on chrononutrition, which is timing your eating, and we also do have an article on intermittent fasting on the website. And most of the dietitians that we work with feel the same way, Lee, that they do not support intermittent fasting for those with IBS for the reasons that you've mentioned. And also, just as a general comment, I mean, Monash, when you're particularly when you're starting the low FODMAP diet, it's going to be a change. It's going to be a big change for people. And so it's recommended that you not overlay any other restrictive type of diet. And so, if you're diabetic and you have to follow a dietary protocol for that, of course you're going to continue to do that. And you're hopefully work with a dietitian so they can help do both at the same time. But it's strongly suggested that you do not voluntarily start any other kind of like restrictive system as at the same time, because it's too much. And frankly, it's going to make your anxiety worse. I
For
mean,
sure.
juggling more. So now we had another question that came in, and this is interesting. So according to anthropological research, our species consumed mostly meat until the agricultural revolution. If this is true, then how would restricting one's specific carbohydrate intake cause dysbiosis if we never consumed much to begin with? I think there's a confusion here because, okay, so the question says, how would restricting one specific carbohydrate intake cause dysbiosis? Well, I mean, I don't know. Why don't you want to feel that?
Yeah, there's I guess a lot to tease out there. I mean, we do know that their ancestors, they did consume different plant species, like they were omnivorous, so they didn't just consume meat. So we'll comment on that.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's been more research just on different dietary patterns and how they influence the gut microbiome. So there was a really good review that looked at compare different diets, the standard Western diet, which we know is quite high in meat products and low in fiber and prebiotic foods, compared with low FODMAP, compared with the Mediterranean diet, which emphasizes things like legumes, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. And the Mediterranean diet pattern was really given like the A plus out of all the diets, and was shown to have sort of, with the people who followed it, they had the highest sort of diversity in their gut microbiome and highest population of sort of beneficial species. So that's one to reference. There was also a really large population-based study done, it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, looking at sort of the diversity of plant foods across like the participants that they looked at, and those who ate at least 30 or more different plant foods in their diet per week had a much higher microbiome diversity than those who ate less than 30. So those are sort of the two maybe key studies that we research when it comes to like talking about the importance of plant diversity and the health of our gut microbiome. So,
And it is, it's I think, well, diversity is key, right? So that's the thing.
yeah.
We have another question here, and this is interesting. I looked up this thing that they mentioned, gamma Dynacare, which apparently is a Canadian thing. So maybe you know about this. So the question is, could you comment on food intolerance testing? And they specifically mention something called gamma Dynacare, which I guess is out of Ontario. Could you please comment on food intolerance testing in relationship to IBS and the low FODMAP diet? Is this testing relevant, and is it evidence-based? In general, none of our dietitians recommend any of the home tests. If this is a home-based test, then
You know what? It's actually one that you can go in and do in a lab. Your doctor has a right requisition for it, so either
okay.
MD or ND. So it's a. I'm just reading it now. So it is one of the IgG food intolerance blood test. So I feel like 20% of my week is like telling people
IgG
not to do
versus
these tests.
IgE. Right. Right.
So the issue with these tests is that they really are not clinically significant when it comes to like assessing food intolerances. So they claim to help you understand what your food sensitivities are, but sort of the main issue with these tests is that they result in a high number of false positives. So they may identify some foods that you're sensitive to, but they will also flag a lot of foods that you actually aren't sensitive to, but it will tell you that they're sensitivity. So a major issue with these tests is that people will go and do them. They spend a lot of money on them. They're like $300 Canadian. Get this whole list of foods that they can't eat, and then they'll go proceed to maybe cut out the foods for a few weeks, and then they really won't feel any better. And when it comes to like the point of anxiety and disordered eating and IBS, what I see is that a lot of people will then become really fearful of adding those foods back in, even though we know that they may not actually be issues for them. So I had a client as well who was following both the low FODMAP diet, and then she was also following results from her food sensitivity blood test for the last year. And her anxiety around food was just like through the charts. So
This is so
yeah.
great. This is a great way to bring it back to the main focus of anxiety. We see this all the time. People come into our groups and they've done one of these home-based tests, and the list is this long, telling them, they're like, oh my God, now I don't know what to do. I can't eat 20 different things, and their anxiety is going through the roof. And like you said, it's not necessarily even true. And over restriction is, we see so much over restriction of food that doesn't need to be happening.
Yeah.
Right. And that it's again, the low FODMAP diet is a clinically based diet. It's a medically based diet. This is what differentiates it from a fad like, Whole30 or paleo, or the way the keto diet has been popularized, for instance. And a lot of people will come to us, they're like, well, I fast intermittently and I feel great. What we do at FODMAP every day, and one of the reasons we love working with you, Lee, is that we're bringing you information that's evidence-based. All of you are individuals. You're in charge of your medical health. You can do whatever you like in, your home. But we're trying to help you understand what has been shown to work or shown not to work, because at least if you start with evidence-based information, you just have a stronger foundation of where to begin your IBS and your anxiety and your, low FODMAP process. If you're just cherry picking and like, oh, I'm going to do a home-based test, and oh, I've heard about fasting and now I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try to overlay, I need to lose weight, so I'm going to do keto and low FODMAP at the same time. Like it's not going to work, and it's going to drive you even more crazy.
For sure. And
Okay,
things can get worse.
yeah. Maria wants to know if you could talk a little more about the vagus nerve and the connection with the brain and the gut.
Yeah, so I guess we missed touching on the impact of actual stress on our digestive system. So I will say as we mentioned, stress and anxiety are not quite the same. I think a lot of people with IBS too are told to just like stress less by their doctor. I think that's a common
stress
thing
less
up here.
right now.
You need to stress less. But the thing with stress is that there actually is like, stress can be positive. Like it can get us sort of like increases like maybe our attention, and it can help us to like work towards something. Like if we do have a work deadline, it can kind of put us into action. So there's a really good book on stress by Kelly McGonigal. She's a psychologist and a researcher. It's called The Upside of Stress, where she talks about how sort of like how we can use stress to our advantage, and not like how stressing about stress, like even in the case of IBS, like, oh, I'm stressed to be stressed because it's going to make my IBS worse. How that can actually just stress your body more. So using stress to our advantage. But when we react to stress in a way that it's like a fight or flight response, that can sort of cause changes in our digestion. So essentially when we have something like a stressor, like there's, like I mentioned, the mountain lion on our hiking path, or, we run into a rattlesnake or something like that. What our body does is like helps to protect us by sort of like getting our resources ready to fight back, to fight or flight So in that instance, it sort of down regulates our parasympathetic nervous system, or like slows it down. So that's the part of our nervous system that's responsible for like everyday processes, recovery, like production of hormones, as well as like our digestive system, digestive functions. And then sort of heightens that sympathetic nervous system, which raises blood sugar and gets us ready to fight the response. So essentially what I'm trying to say here is that stress and sort of like slow down our digestion, and maybe then that's when we see sort of heightened IBS symptoms in response to like a stressor, that fight or flight response. One of the major regulators of our parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is actually like two nerves. We always talk about it as one, but it's sort of the main connector between like our gut and our brain, and it sort of facilitates like that two-way connection, the gut-brain axis. And we have seen that those with IBS, as well as even IBD and GERD, have reduced vagal nerve tone, which may potentially even impact like hunger and fullness cues. It can worsen symptoms of mood and anxiety, and even cause changes in like our digestive functioning. So when it comes to managing IBS as well, like supporting the health of our vagus nerve, there's not a ton of like actual evidence-based information on how we can support that, but doing things like even just yoga or taking some time off, like to downtime after a stressful event, even the gut-directed hypnotherapy, meditation. I really like EFT tapping. All of those things are thought to potentially help support like our vagal nerve tone, which may help us to better manage IBS and support our digestion.
Well, you just figured out your next article that you will write for us on the tapping on the
Oh,
EFT.
yeah,
It'll
yeah,
be great.
yeah. Have you heard of it or
Wait,
no?
yes, no, I have. I
Oh,
have.
I love it.
We
Yes.
have less than 10 minutes left, and Jared has asked a few questions that are interrelated. So we're going to end with that. So, and this is good because this is all like super high level anxiety stuff. So Jared says he has orthorexia nervosa. He's down to maybe eating just 6 foods. He knows this is not healthy for his brain or his gut. He's underweight. He's caught in this cycle of being afraid to eat, but then eating and then feeling like he gets a reaction. So he goes back to hyper restriction. So, you know, he wants to know if you can talk about the rabbit hole of disordered eating and worsening food intolerances and how to escape it. I will quickly say, Jared, that if you want to get in touch with us after the fact, I mean, the big answer is getting you connected with the right registered dietitian, and we will help you with that. But so what would you say to that, Lee?
Yeah. So as I had mentioned earlier, like the more we restrict our diet, just from like reducing the food that our microbes have to eat, but also I should have mentioned too, just even nutrient deficiencies, not getting enough calories in our diet can actually make our digestive symptoms worse. So keeping that in mind, but yeah, I would say in this instance, or for anyone who's maybe struggling with anxiety around food and how it impacts their IBS, one thing I do recommend is maybe doing a social media detox. So I think now a lot of the like fear that we get around food maybe comes from a lot of the stuff that we see or we read online. So even just being really mindful of what we're consuming, maybe you know need to filter what you're seeing on your feed, or even taking some time off of Instagram and TikTok, because there's a lot of fear mongering information on there. And then I would say probably in your instance, I think it would be good to seek some professional support. So definitely when it comes to the psychological aspect, you know, working with a therapist who maybe specializes in IBS and or disordered eating would be really helpful in this situation. And then definitely, as Dede has mentioned, you know, working with a specialized dietitian so that you're able to, you know, add back more diversity into your diet and improve your relationship with food, I think will be really beneficial. And we want to make sure that we do this maybe before things get worse, because I think sometimes that this kind of comes over time when people are maybe kind of caught in that, you know, hole of just trying to fix all these things themselves, reading things online, and then things get worse and they become more restrictive. I think it's sometimes better to maybe reach out for support like earlier rather than it you know going on for too long and
Right,
getting
right.
worse.
So we're going to tie up here. We're at the end. And I think that, what I would say in closing, which is, connected to what you just said, 9 years ago, when I started educating about this diet, we used to talk about approaching things strictly. And I got rid of that word from my vocabulary almost 2 years ago now. And what we like to say is structured.
Mm.
And, I think that that's the great thing that dietitians can bring. Like, so if you're on social media, if you're, like you said, you're seeing all these things all the time, try this, try that, and you're bouncing around and this one's working a little, this one's actually working against this, but you don't realize it because, you're not a health professional, you're not a dietitian, and things are anxiety producing and going crazy. But I think that what dietitians can do is they can provide a structured approach that's going to be tailored to your particular situation. And so it's not only going to ease your mind because there's somebody taking control, giving you direction that's going to be specific to you and your needs, but then physically you're going to start feeling better. You're going to be eating the foods that are appropriate for your needs. Maybe medications involved, maybe supplements involved, who knows? But this is what the registered dietitian is going to do. They're going to take a look at the whole picture. And just knowing that there's someone there that's going to help you is going to take a huge load off your mind. You don't have to do this alone. I think that's, a big takeaway and something that will really go to helping all of us who get anxious around food and have it trigger. So any parting words from you, Lee?
I think just the final thing I will mention too is just when it comes to like managing anxiety as well, it's important to remember that our brain is a major organ and it needs good nutrition, just like our body. So getting enough of certain nutrients, magnesium, B vitamins, vitamin C, etc., those all are going to impact like the structure and the functioning of our brain, as well as the production and regulation of neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, all those things that play a role in good mood. So if you haven't, I encourage you to read the article because we talk more about
Oh,
nutrients that support your brain health. So I just want to put that out there too, is that sometimes we may need medication to help with anxiety symptoms as well, but don't discount the impact that good nutrition has on your brain function and your mood as well.
excellent. Thank you so much. Well, this will be recorded. We will put it up here, there, and everywhere in our social channels. Hopefully, all of you are signed up for our newsletter at FODMAP Everyday. If you're not, please come to our homepage and sign up because you will be the first then to be alerted of upcoming webinars, articles like this, videos when they're ready to be pushed out there. And thank you so much for your time, everybody. And we will work on doing that visceral hypersensitivity one as well.